What's good, man? We right here with a movie for y'all, man. Let's see this shit hit. 175 miles from New York to LA. Is this even possible?
I'm going to show you how to race from New York to Los Angeles as fast as you can without stopping. The race is called the Cannonball, and honestly it's less of a race and more of a battle against the law. A battle that requires a bulletproof plan, a very modified car, and a team with a couple of screws loose. Doug Tabbitt, Arnie Taman, and Dunadel Daryush, this is the team that currently holds the record. And that record didn't come easy. The trio in question aren't newbies when it comes to driving fast cross-country. Doug and Arnie have been racing the Cannonball for years, and they've refined routes, equipment, and know the interstate system east to west. But the Cannonball race didn't start with Arnie or Doug. In fact, its origin didn't start as a race at all. It started as the hobby of a man named Irwin Baker. Baker started his racing addiction as a motorcyclist, signed to the Indian Motorcycle Racing Team in 1909, and he quickly became the go-to man for long-distance riding. He crossed Jamaica, Cuba, and even Panama on his Indian motorcycle. Then, in 1914, he crossed America. He rode 3,329 miles from San Diego to New York on his Indian motorcycle. It took him 11 days, 12 hours, and 19 minutes, and it was a nationwide headline. And soon the reputation he was building caught the attention of a man more interested in four wheels than two. Harry C. Stutz, the founder of the Stutz Motor Company. In 1915, Harry Stutz offered Irwin one of their Stutz Bearcat sports cars. The only catch, Irwin had to drive it across the country, from San Diego to New York. Irwin Baker left San Diego in that Stutz, and after a tumultuous 11 days, 7 hours, and 15 minutes, he arrived in New York City. It was an amazing feat, so amazing that news reporters gave him a new nickname, Cannonball Baker. But even still, Baker's cross-country automotive feat still wasn't called the Cannonball. That only happened in 1933, when Cannonball Baker completed arguably his most famous cross-country run. This time he started in New York City behind the wheels of a Graham Page Model 57 Blue Streak, and then set off for Los Angeles. And this time, Cannonball Baker would go on to set a record that stood for over 30 years, arriving in LA after just 53 hours and 5 minutes. 53 hours to do a drive that once took him over 11 days. It was both a testament to how far cars had come in the last few decades and how vastly improved the US highway system was compared to just a few years prior. And after that legendary New York to LA run, the race officially became known as the Cannonball Run. It's safe to say though that Doug, Arnie, and Dunadel's 2020 run was going to be a fair bit faster than 53 hours. After all, automotive technology had come a long way since the days of the 60 horsepower Stutz Bearcat. And the obvious choice of car for them would be their seasoned Cannonball car, the Mercedes E63 AMG. Over 700 horsepower of German V8 power, all while looking like your grandma's daily driver. Not to mention an entire arsenal of police avoidance systems, which I'll explain in detail later. But there was one big issue with that car. A truck driver fell asleep while driving on the highway, right at the spot that Arnie Taman and his E63 were pulled over on the shoulder. And well, as you can see, the E63 was no more. But this team wasn't one to give up, so they acted quick and bought their friend's C7 Corvette. It was a fast car and could probably do a decent time, but just fast in the Cannonball doesn't cut it. You need stability at speed, the space to fit massive fuel tanks, and a litany of equipment, and perhaps most importantly, you needed to be able to be completely hidden in plain sight. Of course, what about an EV? They're fast, efficient, generally quite aerodynamic, and pretty unoffensive to look at. No need to pack in massive fuel tanks either, and some of the highest end EVs like the Tesla Model S Plaid and the Lucid Air can get nearly 500 miles on a charge. But that presents a couple of issues. First of which is that EVs don't always work as advertised. A March Cannonball run means cold weather in much of the US, and EVs can see a reduction of anywhere from 10 to 40% of their range in cold weather. A problem that manufacturers are desperately trying to solve right now. For a car like the Lucid Air Grand Touring, that could be 50 to 200 miles sacrificed just to drive in the cold with the heat on. And before you say that insert political party here made this stat up, thanks to Ground News, we can clearly see that 69% of the sources for this topic are center-leaning, meaning most of the articles articles are politically neutral. And not just that, we can see who owns the news outlets and if there's any issues with factuality in their articles. In a time when news about electric vehicles and the automotive world in general can seem highly politicized, tools like ground news are crucial for uncovering media bias as well as opening our eyes to blind spots that we have in our own knowledge. You can check out these articles at our link in the description, and you can sign up for free and stay informed without hidden media bias. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. EV certainly wouldn't work for a chilly 3,000-mile journey. So Arnie and the team quickly realized that they needed another German super sedan. Lucky for them, Arnie's friend had an Audi S6 that he might have been able to part with. 4-liter V8, 450 plus horsepower. It wasn't an E63, but it would be more than enough to blast down the interstate at sustained triple-digit speeds. So Arnie called his friend Tuesday morning, and 30 minutes later, he was on his way to pick up the Audi S6 that would break the Cannonball race record. Now, I keep saying Cannonball race, but up till now, the story has always been about one car and one team going the distance. And that's more of a time trial than a race. But 50 years ago, the Cannonball was actually a wheel-to-wheel competition, thanks to the senior editor of Car and Driver at the time, Brock Yates. In May of 1971, Brock Yates and his 3 teammates took a 1971 Dodge Caravan Sportsman that they called Moon Trash 2 and rushed across America in 40 hours and 51 minutes. It was supposed to be a celebration of the excellent US highway system and an FU to the government for their overly strict traffic laws. But also, this was the inaugural run to launch their new event, the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash. And they announced that on November 15th, things were gonna get serious, because they would be holding their first ever Cannonball race. Yates organized 23 drivers in 6 different cars, and all 6 teams met at the same starting point that Brock and his team established earlier in May, the Red Ball Garage in New York City. At the start was a Chevy Sport van rigged with 298 gallons of fuel tanks, a Cadillac DeVille, an MGB GT, a Dodge van with nearly 200 gallons of gas tank, a Ferrari 365 GTB, a freaking 1966 motorhome, a 1969 AMX, and of course, the Moon Trash 2. A wide variety of cars, all built for the different roads of life. And that's what made the Cannonball race so unique. It didn't matter what the car was. All that mattered was if you could survive those 3,000 miles. 35 hours and 54 minutes later, it was the Ferrari 365 that won the first Cannonball Sea to Shining Sea race. But not for the reason you might think. It wasn't the fastest car in the race. In fact, the Cadillac actually hit the highest speeds of all the teams. The Ferrari won simply because it had the perfect balance of everything. Decent MPG, excellent acceleration, all while being relatively comfortable and easy to handle. Not to mention, it had Dan Gurney behind the wheel with Brock Yates as co-driver. But even though the Ferrari won, the top 5 cars were separated by just 2 hours. And that's what made this race so different. There wasn't just one recipe to the best strategy. You needed a little bit of everything and the ability to execute on a solid plan. The unofficial Cannonball Sea to Shining Sea race happened 4 more times in the 70s, and the 1979 race saw over 40 teams register. Even a new record was set with a Jaguar XJS finishing in 32 hours and 51 minutes. But 40 plus cars racing flat out across the United States was clearly becoming a bad idea. Yates didn't want to be responsible for any injuries or, God forbid, deaths. So after 1979, Brock Yates ended the Sea to Shining Sea race for good. But even though that meant that the Cannonball race was dead, that didn't mean the Cannonball run was. Now, you already know that, because a certain Audi S6 set out for the coast-to-coast run just a few decades later. You wouldn't have been able to tell it was an Audi, however, because Arnie and the team decided to give the car a little makeover. You see, if you squint your eyes, the Audi S6 kind of looks like a Ford Taurus. But if you apply some body color vinyl along with the right decals, a fake Ford Audi badge, then the Audi S6 really looks like a Ford Taurus Police Interceptor. And this would be the disguise that would take Arnie, Doug, and Dunadell across America. And on a quiet night in May 2020, they took off from the Red Ball Garage in New York City, just like Brock Yates and his team did all those years ago. Unlike Brock Yates, however, it took them only 4.5 minutes to get out of Manhattan. COVID restrictions saw traffic at their lowest levels in years. That was largely the reason they needed to make this run happen in such short order. Just a few months earlier, their previous record was completely smashed by an amateur team in a leased Audi A8. And for Arnie and Doug, that wasn't something they could just let stand. So it wasn't long before they were out of New York entirely and into Pennsylvania, flying down the highway at speeds that were a little more than the limit. But that's when they encountered their first problem. the cops. A state trooper was cruising on the highway, and of course the team couldn't just blow right by him. And this is where the next crucial tool for a cannonballer comes into play: scouts. Arnie and Doug set up a network of friends that would act as scouts, driving on the highways ahead of where they were and surveying the roads for potential obstacles. But when surveying wasn't enough, scouts had one other duty. They were bait. Doug called up one of their local scouts and told him that he needed to blow by this cop at extra legal speeds and get pulled over, willingly. And so their scout caught up to where they were and lined up to sacrifice himself to the Pennsylvania Rozzers. But right as the scout was getting ready to smash the gas, the cop pulled off the freeway, and the team was off the hook. The S6 was now free to stretch its legs, so they put the hammer down and started flying. And from Pennsylvania to Colorado, they averaged 120 miles per hour, with much of the stint being at 160 miles per hour, putting them well ahead of where they needed to beat the record. That is, until a radio call blared out on their police scanner.
White Audi made to look like a police car. 024A written on the back. Plate is obscured.
It seemed that not everyone was falling for the disguise, and the cops knew what Arnie and the team were up to. And maybe that's because the cannonball wasn't as underground of an event as it used to be. Because in the late 1980s, the cannonball actually hit the box office. Just as Brock Yates ended the cannonball races in 1979, he began working on the 1981 movie titled The Cannonball Run. And we're not talking about some indie film. No, this was a full-on box office hit with Burt Reynolds, Dean Martin, Jackie Chan, and Farrah Fawcett. It was a comedy about a fictional cannonball run, and even though it wasn't the most critically acclaimed film, it ended up being the 4th highest grossing opening weekend of all time. And that meant that now nearly everyone in America knew about the cannonball. And that kind of notoriety meant that even though Brock Yates' Sea to Shining Sea race was over, a new race was being hatched up by other cannonball enthusiasts, this time called the US Express. That race ran from 1980 to 1983, and it had all the crazy antics that the old race had. But only once was the Jaguars record broken in that time. It was in 1983 when Doug Turner alongside David Diem crossed the country in 32 hours and 7 minutes behind the wheel of their 1980 Ferrari 308 GTS, a record that stayed for nearly over 20 years. Because the popularity of the cannonball really tapered off after the mid-80s. Perhaps the widespread knowledge of the run made it lose its...
So you could really just fucking drive anywhere in the US because of the freeways? That's pretty sick.
niche appeal, or maybe people just lost interest with how slow new cars with emissions-compliant engines were. Either way, the 1983 run was the de facto cannonball record, and, well, nobody could beat it. Of course, until rather recently, when in 2006, a gentleman by the name of Alex Roy took a Le Mans Blue BMW M5, fitted it with the best of modern technology, and smashed that 23-year-old record. On the outside, the car was mostly stock with the exception of an upgraded suspension and brakes for the long endurance runs, and beyond that, a quick ECU flash removed the 155 mph speed limiter in order to reach its true top speed of 195 miles per hour. And then of course there were the antennas all over the car, rigged for a police scanner and a CB radio. Oh, and the white stripes above the car, well, that was for the spotter plane up in the sky to see the M5 and be able to communicate any potential hazards to them. Yes, Alex Roy took this to a whole new level, and from here on out, this was the new standard of cannonballing. He and his friend Dave completed the run in 31 hours and 4 minutes. A new record. But the years that followed Alex Roy's record saw the roads get better, cars get faster, and most importantly, police avoidance technology get far more advanced. So in 2013, Alex's record fell. This time, it was to Ed Bolian. Yes, that Ed Bolian. And just in case you were living under a rock, you should probably go check out his content on VinWiki. Ed drove a 2004 Mercedes-Benz CL55 AMG, and to get with the times, he equipped it with a bunch of countermeasures to give him the best chances possible. He had 2 Valentine radar detectors, 3 Garmin GPS systems, a CB radio, a radio scanner, 2 laser jammers, a dang ambulance traffic light changer, and then of course a custom fuel tank setup. And all that stuff paid off. Ed set a time of 28 hours and 50 minutes, shattering Alex's 31-hour run. But then came the heroes of our story, Arnie Toman and Doug Tabbitt, just a few years later in 2019. The car they used was none other than the 2015 E63 AMG built by AMS Performance. When it was built though, the car made 700 wheel horsepower and had a dual nozzle quick fill fuel cell with a total fuel capacity of 65 gallons. And the police countermeasures, well, that was next level as well. well. 2 radar detectors, laser diffusers, an app that gave them police heat maps, a radio scanner, a CB radio, another police scanner with GPS, brake light cutoff switches, image stabilized binoculars, an aircraft detection system, and of course a traffic light changer. Oh, and a freaking thermal scope on a gimbal. But if you want the details, you should definitely read Arnie's blog, linked in the show notes below. I can't tell you their finish time, 27 hours and 25 minutes. Well over an hour faster than Ed's record. And if Ed records seem impossible, then surely this record was here to stay forever. But you know the drill by now. It didn't stay forever. Because there was one more ingredient to the perfect cannonball recipe. One that everyone else had missed. Something that would allow for Arnie and Doug's record to be shattered with ease. A freaking pandemic. COVID lockdowns meant that every interstate highway was now wide open, and the record was for the taking. So in March 2020, somebody took it. An amateur team led by Chris Allen took a leased Audi A8, fitted it with a single Valentine V1, a hacked together marine fuel cell system, and a pair of binoculars. And they set off to break the cannonball record. They completed their run in 26 hours and 38 minutes, taking nearly another hour off of Doug and Arnie's time. Imagine then how fast somebody could get across a pandemic lockdown USA with a seasoned team, a fully prepped car, and all the equipment money could buy. Flash forward to Doug, Arnie, and Dunedell's 2020 Cannonball, and it was exactly that. Of course, you already know, the team and the car were up to par, but they certainly weren't lacking in the tech department either. Radar detectors complemented by laser diffusers, multiple GPSs running on a variety of platforms to get any and all information about road hazards.
Someone gotta beat it in a scat pack, bro. Or a Hellcat, it'll be more cool.
Speed traps. They even had the E63's plane crash avoidance system designed to detect aircraft in the vicinity just in case the police were enforcing speed by plane. Add to that a thermal vision camera and high-powered binoculars. It was tech that was unheard of in Brock Yates' days and honestly pretty wild for any cannonballer. But it was tech that was necessary to break records. That, along with the 67 gallons of auxiliary fuel tanks that they had in the trunk of the car. Modification that has been necessary since the very earliest days of Cannonball. And with all that, the team continued through Colorado at blazing speeds, but by the time they got to Utah, they encountered something unexpected: traffic. Now, the whole magic of doing runs in COVID lockdown was to take advantage of those empty roads and people sheltering in place. But Utah didn't have those same COVID restrictions, and many Californians were traveling to and from Utah so they could enjoy an unrestricted vacation. Motorhomes, trucks towing boats and jet skis, the usual inept Californian drivers all blocked the road for the tired trio in their Audi. That 120-mile-per-hour average ticked down, slowly but surely, and it seemed like the record was slipping away with it. But they managed to get through Utah traffic, and then they blasted through the Nevada desert, finally into California. But despite the lockdown in Cali, LA traffic was still horrendous. The team was still getting stuck behind trucks, red lights, smug EV drivers, you name it. But they soldiered on. Red light by light, they made their way through Los Angeles. Until finally, as the sun was setting over the city of Angels, that war-torn Audi pulled up to the Portofino Inn. And their official time, 25 hours and 39 minutes. Nearly an hour faster than the previous fastest record, and 2 hours faster than their own record in the E63. It was a tremendous accomplishment. The Cannonball started off as a feat that would take over a week at the hands of Ernie Baker, then just days in the era of Brock Yates, to now taking hardly over a single day. 3 determined drivers behind the wheel of a deviously disguised German super sedan packed full of the best tech, with the support of their faithful scouts, did the impossible and set a Cannonball record that is yet to be beaten to this day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how to race from New York to Los Angeles as fast as you can without stopping. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and join us on Discord to see what we're cooking up next. I'll see you in the next one.